Amara dropped her suitcase in the foyer of her suburban home. The flight from London had landed almost an hour early, and her driver had expertly navigated the light mid-afternoon traffic. She took a deep breath, heart fluttering with excitement. After months of grueling work on a major business deal, she'd finally secured a promotion. The international consultancy firm she worked for had offered her a position as regional director, and with it came the possibility of relocating to New York, a dream she had harbored since college. She imagined the expression on Tariq's face when he found out. He had been so encouraging about her ambition, or so she believed. Their conversations over late-night cups of tea had always revolved around how they both wanted to rise in their careers, how they would conquer the world together. She pictured him smiling, arms open for a hug, and that warm glint in his eyes whenever he was proud of her. The front door was already unlocked, which struck her as odd. She slowly pushed it open. From the foyer, she could see red and white streamers hanging across the living room. Strange, she thought, because there was no mention of any party on the phone that morning when she called Tark to say a quick goodnight. The faint scent of vanilla cupcakes drifted from the kitchen, and the murmur of hushed voices echoed from inside. With her portfolio bag clutched in one hand, Amara walked into the living room. Rows of balloons lined the ceiling. About a dozen people stood there, some with plates of food in their hands. It looked like a celebration, just not one she had been invited to. Faces turned in her direction, and for a moment no one spoke. That pause, that collective intake of breath, made her heart skip a beat. Suddenly, her eyes fell on a huge banner that read, "Welcome baby," in bold letters. Confusion seized her. She glanced at the guests. Some were members of Tariq's family, a few neighbors, and, surprisingly, her childhood friend Janelle, standing at the center of it all with a shy smile on her face. But the strangest part? There was no reason for a baby shower that she knew of. Their marriage had hit some bumps. They'd talked about starting a family in the future, but never now. How did this come to be? Still stunned, she took a half step forward. Then her eyes locked on Tariq, who stood beside Janelle, his arm draped around her shoulder. It was such an intimate gesture, something she would normally share with her husband. Her mind scrambled for a sensible explanation, but all she had was a shocking, gut-twisting wave of dread. Before she could gather her thoughts, people's smiles faded. Everyone looked as if they'd been caught in the act. And in that moment, Amara felt a sudden loss of gravity. She had come home a day early with the best news of her career, only to find a living room full of secret celebrations and a husband who wasn't acting like a husband at all. She swallowed, feeling her knees tremble beneath her. She hadn't expected this. The room, once so familiar, now felt suffocating. In that instant, she knew something was terribly, devastatingly wrong. "Amara," someone exclaimed in a voice that tried too hard to be cheerful. It was Aunt Remi, Tariq's gregarious aunt, who always lived for a juicy story. But even her boisterous tone couldn't mask the tension filling the space. Amara forced a smile. She took 2 hesitant steps into the room. As she did, she noticed the decorations more clearly: pastel balloons, diaper-themed cupcakes, a big sign with storks and baby footprints. This wasn't some generic party, it was specifically a baby shower. And the mother-to-be at the center of it all was none other than her own best friend, Janelle. Her gaze swept from Janelle's rounded belly to the name banner in pink letters. She saw Mrs. Cade, Tariq's mother, fussing over a table of gifts. Usually, the older woman greeted Amara with warmth, though that warmth had cooled since Amara had taken to traveling so frequently for work. But now, Mrs. Cade avoided her eyes. No one stepped forward to explain the situation. Then, as if on cue, Tariq's arms shifted around Janelle, his fingertips pressing gently into the small of her back. Something about that gesture, that slip of intimacy, was wrong. Horribly wrong. A silent question lodged itself in Amara's throat. Why are you holding her like that? A tear threatened to spill from her eye, but she held it back with practiced composure. After all, she was used to high-pressure business deals. She knew how to keep her expression neutral. Yet, inside, her heart threatened to burst with confusion and betrayal. Amara, you're back earlier than expected, Tariq said, clearing his throat. He tried on a charismatic smile, but it faltered the moment his eyes locked with hers. We thought you were flying in tomorrow. That's obvious, Amara managed to say, her voice shaking. Mind telling me what's going on here? An uncomfortable hush enveloped the room. Guests exchanged fleeting glances. Janelle's eyes darted toward the floor, her cheeks stained with guilt. Even Aunt Remi, who was almost always chatty, stood nervously by the table. For a moment, it seemed that no one wanted to answer. Finally, a neighbor, whom Amara barely recognized, stammered, "We were just, Tark said." Mrs. Kate interjected, "We're just having a little celebration." Her tone was clipped. She glanced between Tariq and Janelle, a silent command passing between them. "Why don't we, maybe we should take this conversation into another room." Amara's stomach lurched. She felt like an intruder in her own home, in her own marriage. The sense of dread intensified. Everyone seemed to know what was happening, except for her. She clutched her briefcase strap tighter, knuckles widening. "Whose baby shower is this?" she asked, voice trembling. She was almost afraid of the answer, but she needed the confirmation. No one replied. Instead, she saw Janelle's eyes fill with tears. The look of guilt on her face answered Amara's question far more clearly than words ever could. Time slowed, and it felt like everyone's eyes were on Amara, waiting for her reaction. A wave of sickness rolled through her stomach. The career win that had made her feel invincible mere hours ago now felt meaningless. She fought a sudden urge to drop to her knees, but she locked them stiff, refusing to show weakness in front of all these people. She demanded an explanation, with her eyes, with her trembling posture, if not with her voice. Yet all she got was that suffocating silence. Mrs. Kate swept forward with forced enthusiasm. "Amara, my dear, let's just step outside and talk. We can sort this out privately." Amara shook her head, stepping back. A protective wave of indignation shot through her. This was her home. "No. I'm not going anywhere until someone explains exactly why there's a baby shower for Janelle, and why Tariq is acting like it's his responsibility." Tariq cleared his throat. He glanced at Janelle, a flicker of panic in his eyes. "Amara, listen, this isn't how I wanted you to find out. You weren't supposed to be here yet." The casual cruelty of those words made Amara's breath catch. As though her presence was the problem, her arriving early was the problem, not what they were doing behind her back. Her hand shook as she placed it on the back of a chair to steady herself. "You weren't supposed to be here yet?" Amara echoed, voice dripping with disbelief. "So you planned to have a celebration in my own house, with my so-called best friend, while I was away on a business trip?" Aunt Remi tried to intervene. "Amara, maybe we should let them explain." "Explain what?" Amara's voice cracked. "That I just walked into a baby shower for my friend, who's apparently pregnant with my husband by her side. That's the explanation I'm waiting for." Janelle broke then, tears streaming down her cheeks. She mumbled something incoherent, her trembling fingers clutching at the hem of her flowy maternity top. Tark tried to speak, but the words got caught in his throat. He looked like a man cornered by his own deceit. Amara's heart pounded violently. All the stress of the flight, the exhaustion of the past few months, and the sudden blow of betrayal collided within her. She felt dizzy, as though the room might tilt any second. But she refused to faint, she was stronger than that. She exhaled, took a moment to gather her composure, and in a voice far calmer than she felt, she said, "I want the truth. Right now. Is this your baby, Tariq?" The hush in the room deepened. Finally, Tariq shrugged helplessly. "Amara, I'm sorry." It was an admission, albeit a cowardly one. Amara's lungs constricted. Though she'd suspected the worst, hearing the confirmation was like a physical blow. She squeezed her eyes shut, a wave of memories flooding her, the first time she introduced Janelle to Tark at a college alumni mixer, the nights they'd all spent together laughing over takeout, the excited messages from Janelle whenever they planned a girls' trip. Now, it all felt like one cruel, orchestrated joke. She opened her eyes, nails biting into her palm. "Everybody, please leave," she said shakily. It took all her willpower not to scream. "This party is over." For a split second, no one moved. They simply stared, the tension heavier than the heat of midday sun. Then, one by one, they began to shuffle out. A few people murmured apologies or awkward goodbyes. In less than a minute, the living room cleared, leaving only Tariq, Janelle, and Mrs. Cade. Amara blinked back the tears threatening to spill. "I want answers," she demanded. Now. The soft hum of the air conditioner was the only sound in the abruptly quiet room. Janelle stood near the coffee table, tears still trickling down her cheeks. She reached out as if to comfort Amara, but Amara recoiled. "Don't," Amara hissed. "Don't even think about it." Tariq moved to stand between them, his expression tortured. "Amara, She glared at him. "Is this your baby?" Janelle flinched visibly at Amara's directness. Her lower lip trembled. "Amara! I never meant for this to happen like this." I asked a question," Amara said with a calmness that she didn't feel. "Is this his baby?" Silence. A weighted, suffocating silence, broken only by the distant sound of a car door slamming outside. Then Janelle nodded, so slightly it was almost imperceptible. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm 6 months along. Tariq is the father." Amara let out a ragged breath, her eyes fluttering shut for a moment. She felt as if the ground might open beneath her. Her best friend was pregnant with her husband's baby. She'd never felt such a potent cocktail of rage and sorrow in her life. "How long?" she finally managed. "How long has this been going on?" Tariq cleared his throat again. A while," he admitted. "It started out as a mistake. We connected while you were traveling so much for work. One thing led to another, and we..." Amara let out a harsh laugh, a laugh devoid of any real mirth. "A mistake, is that what you're calling it?" She turned to Janelle. "We've known each other since we were children. How could you?" Janelle's tears flowed freely now. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "You were gone so often, and Tariq, he felt alone, he said you two were drifting apart. I never wanted this to happen, but I..." "Stop," Amara snapped. "I don't want to hear a sob story about how you both fell into each other's arms because I dared to pursue my career." Her voice was razor sharp. From the corner of the room, Mrs. Cade cleared her throat. "Amara, dear, perhaps if you had given Tariq a bit more time at home." Amara spun to face her mother-in-law. "Don't even start. You've never liked my job. You think a married woman should stay home with children. Don't shift the blame onto me. They did this." Mrs. Cade pressed her lips together in silent disapproval, but she said nothing more. A thick swirl of emotions coursed through Amara, betrayal, heartbreak, anger. Yet overshadowing all of them was a new determination, a sense that she needed to keep her wits about her, especially with a mother-in-law who might be just as complicit. She took a step back, crossing her arms over her chest as though to hold herself together. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke again, but it crackled with authority. "I want both of you out of this house. Tonight." Janelle stared at her with wide eyes. "Amara, this is your home with Tariq. I have my own apartment. I don't care where you stay," Amara said, her face stone cold. "But you don't get to celebrate a baby shower here without me knowing, and then expect me to welcome you with open arms. Get out." Tariq looked as though he wanted to protest. He stared at Amara with a peculiar mixture of guilt and desperation. "I'll give you some space, okay?" he finally murmured. "But we do need to talk." Amara nodded curtly. She couldn't bring herself to say anything else. Her best friend and her husband had destroyed the life she thought she knew. Janelle reached out one last time, but Amara turned away. With a trembling breath, she waited until she heard them gather their things and shuffle out into the dusk. When the door finally closed, Amara felt her knees buckle. She sank onto the sofa, letting the tears flood her vision. The day that started with career triumphs had ended in personal tragedy. And the night was just beginning. For hours, Amara sat alone in the silent house, numb to the world outside. She tried to piece together every sign, every clue she might have missed. Could she have sensed something was wrong? There were times when Tark would come home late, or Janelle would cancel their girls' night at the last minute. She'd assumed they both had their own lives, their own obligations. Maybe she'd been too consumed by her job to notice the shift. She thought back to college, when she and Janelle were inseparable. They laughed about everything, shared heartbreak stories, and promised to always have each other's backs. When Amara met Tariq at a networking event, Janelle had been the first to approve of him. Amara had teased her for liking his dimpled smile, but never suspected a deeper attraction. They were all so young then, so carefree. Now, all those memories felt tainted. She wondered if Janelle's feelings for Tariq had existed even back then. She recalled that Janelle had once had a string of unsuccessful relationships, and Amara had offered her unconditional support. To realize now that she had unwittingly brought her dear friend closer to her own husband made her stomach churn with rage and sorrow. Tired of being alone with her thoughts, Amara got up and wandered through the aftermath of the party. Discarded paper plates and half-eaten cupcakes dotted the kitchen. She stared blankly at the bright pink frosting, a baby girl, apparently. A tear slipped down her cheek. She had once imagined celebrating a baby shower for her child with Tariq, but now the reality was twisted beyond measure. Her phone buzzed on the countertop, jolting her from her daze. She glanced at the screen. It was her mother, Mama Neka, calling. Normally, she would have answered eagerly, but at that moment, she didn't have the energy to explain the catastrophe that had just unfolded. Still, she couldn't bear the silence any longer, so she swiped to accept the call. "Amara?" Mama Neka's warm voice floated through the speaker. "My dear, how was your flight? I thought you weren't arriving until tomorrow." Amara swallowed hard. "I got an earlier flight," she replied, forcing stability into her voice. "Listen, Mama, tonight's not a good time. You sound off. Is something wrong? You know you can tell me anything." Amara closed her eyes, a sob catching in her throat. She wanted to confide in her mother, to spill every ounce of pain in her chest. But some part of her worried that once she spoke the words out loud, her heartbreak would become too real to handle. She wasn't quite ready for the flood of her parents' concern or anger. I'm just tired," she said finally. "I'll call you tomorrow, okay? I promise." A brief pause hummed over the line, as though Mama Neka sensed her daughter's torment. "All right, my child," she said gently. "But remember, no matter what it is, your father and I are here. We love you." Amara hung up and sighed, the weight of her secret heavy on her chest. She pressed a hand against her heart, as though trying to keep it from shattering further. She told herself she would call them in the morning. Right now, she needed to process the betrayal alone. She cast one final glance around her home. The cheerful decorations left behind felt like a cruel joke, mocking her for having been so trusting, so naive. She realized then that the betrayal likely ran deeper than a single night of passion. It was premeditated, hidden behind her back for months. With trembling fingers, she started to rip down the banner that read "Welcome Baby," with its cartoon storks. She couldn't bear to look at it any longer. As the paper tore, she felt a surge of anger. Anger at Tariq. Anger at Janelle. And, at some unspoken level, anger at herself for not seeing it sooner. Barely slept. She drifted off for an hour or two on the living room couch, fully clothed, tear tracks drying on her cheeks. The bright summer sunlight filtering through the blinds felt invasive. She groaned, rubbing her eyes. Her phone was buzzing yet again. She expected maybe another call from her mother or a friend. Instead, the caller ID displayed Janelle's name. For a moment, she considered ignoring it. But curiosity and fury compelled her to press answer. Amara, please, Janelle's voice quivered with desperation. Can we talk? Amara clenched her jaw. What could you possibly say that I'd want to hear? Janelle sniffled. He said you abandoned him, that you were gone for weeks on end, never showing any affection, that you'd chosen your career over your marriage. I thought. You thought that justified sleeping with my husband? Amara cut her off, her tone ice cold. She took a deep breath, determined to keep some semblance of control. And how exactly did I abandon him? Janelle was silent for a moment, then began again. He told me you rarely spoke about kids or family. He said you brushed off the idea of starting a family now, that you had no time for him. He made it sound like you were more of a business partner than a wife. Amara's throat constricted. Listen to me. Yes, I've been traveling for work, trying to pay off our mortgage and help him launch that startup. How is that abandoning him? I remember him being the one who insisted I go for those overseas gigs, who praised me for being so driven. Now you're telling me he painted me as some kind of neglectful spouse? Janelle hesitated. He did. At first, I was surprised. But he said he felt lonely. He said you never cared to ask how he was doing. He told me you were the one who insisted on a bigger house, on lavish expenses, so you could show off your success. So he justified using some of your joint savings for his personal needs. I believed him because I loved him, too. And I assumed you didn't. Tears of fury welled up in Amara's eyes. She wanted to scream, but she steadied her voice. You believed him because it was convenient for you. Let me tell you the truth, Janelle, I worked hard to keep this family afloat. You know how I was raised. My parents taught me to value education, to strive for excellence. I did everything to make sure Tariq's dreams came true. If he felt lonely, he never said so to my face. Don't you dare blame this on me. Silence hung like a heavy cloak. Finally, Janelle breathed, I'm so sorry. I should have asked you, but I was already falling for him. I wanted to believe what he said. Amara pinched the bridge of her nose. 1,000 questions swarmed in her mind, but the sheer betrayal was too big to dissect in one phone call. I have to go, she said, her voice hard. Don't call me again. She ended the call without waiting for a response. For a long moment, she sat there, trembling. He said you abandoned him. The words echoed in her ears, fueling a burning mixture of pain and indignation. She replayed old conversations with Tariq, remembering the times he'd insisted that traveling for work was good for her career, that she shouldn't feel guilty leaving him alone. Now she realized it might have been part of a larger plan. And the thought made her blood run cold. Amara called her parents after a shower and a cup of strong coffee. She needed their support, even though she wasn't sure how they'd react. Her father, Papa Chitty, answered in his steady, reassuring baritone. Amara, my dear, he greeted, though there was a note of worry in his tone. Your mother told me you sounded upset yesterday. Is everything all right? She inhaled shakily. Papa, I don't know how to say this gently, but Tariq has gotten someone pregnant. Janelle. A stunned silence stretched across the line. Then her mother's voice came through in the background, echoing shock. Janelle? Janelle? The one who you've known since you were little? Yes, Mama, Amara said, trying to keep her composure. Papa Chitty sighed deeply. Amara, my child, are you sure of this? It sounds unbelievable. I saw it with my own eyes, she answered, her voice tremoring. They were literally having a baby shower in my house. Everyone knew. Even his mother, Mama. I walked in on it. 6 months along, apparently. She heard her father release another weary sigh. She pictured him removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. This is shocking. I don't know what to say. Mama Neka jumped in, her voice filled with fury. That boy! After all we've done for him, all the times we welcomed him like our own son. And Janelle, that girl I let sleep in our house, eat at our table, how could she do this to you? Tears prickled the corners of Amara's eyes. I'm still trying to figure it out. Papa Chitty cleared his throat. Amara, do you want us to come over? We can be there later today if you need us. She paused, longing for their comforting presence, but also aware that she needed to handle some of this on her own. Not yet, she finally said. I just need a bit of space. Let me figure out my next steps. All right, my dear, Papa Chitty said gently. But know that we are just a call away. Whatever you decide, we support you. Amara ended the call with a semblance of relief. At least her parents were in her corner, no confusion there. She leaned against the kitchen counter, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She nearly jumped out of her skin when the doorbell rang. She opened it to find Papa Chitty standing on her porch, looking older and more solemn than she remembered. Behind him stood Mama Neka, who was clearly teary-eyed. It took a moment for Amara to realize they had driven through the night to be here first thing in the morning. Oh, Papa, Mama, her words caught in her throat, tears suddenly burning behind her eyelids. She wrapped them both in a trembling embrace. They entered the house, and as soon as her parents saw the remnants of the baby decorations, Mama Neka let out a pained gasp. The betrayal was no longer just a story told over the phone, it was visible in every pastel balloon still lingering in the corners. They sat together in the living room, and that's when the door opened again. In walked Papa Chitty's old friend from the local community who had driven them over. The man greeted Amara with subdued politeness, but there was something in his eye, something akin to pity. Amara offered to make tea, but her father quietly shook his head. He seemed too distraught to accept any hospitality. She watched him rake a hand through his graying hair, his gaze drifting to the baby decorations on the floor. When she started to explain how it all happened, she noticed Papa Chitty's eyes glisten with tears he refused to let fall. Then he suddenly looked away, as if the weight of her pain was too much for him to bear. It was that small gesture, her father looking away, that broke her heart in a way she hadn't anticipated. Seeing him hurt because of her situation, seeing him unable to meet her eyes, made the betrayal feel even sharper. Parents yearn for their children's happiness. She had never expected them to witness her marriage falling apart like this. Later that day, Amara escorted her parents to a nearby hotel where they could rest. She promised she'd be fine for the next few hours, she needed to handle some errands. In truth, she also needed some space to think. The presence of family, while comforting, was overwhelming. She wanted to gather evidence, talk to a lawyer, and truly understand her legal options before deciding on a course of action. She began by combing through emails and texts on her phone. There had to be some proof of Tariq's affair. She remembered nights when she suspected he was out with friends, but perhaps he was really meeting Janelle. She also had access to their joint bank statements. Maybe something would show up there. Her heart pounded as she opened the banking app on her tablet. She'd been the primary breadwinner for years, funneling her salary and bonuses into their joint account. She noticed several withdrawals that didn't match normal expenses. Large sums of cash gone without explanation, usually on nights when she was traveling. It seemed like Tariq was paying for hotel stays or other events. The timestamps matched her business trips. Then her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from one of her credit card providers containing the monthly statement. She clicked it open and nearly dropped her tablet. There it was, charges for lavish dinners, florists, jewelry stores. All timed suspiciously with her business travel. We didn't mean for it to happen, Janelle had said. But these receipts suggested otherwise. This wasn't a single slip-up, it was a sustained affair with months of secret spending. Her blood boiled. She felt like a fool. All the nights she'd be on the phone with Tariq, hearing him say he was just at home watching a movie, he was actually out buying gifts for Janelle. It was like discovering a string of little murders, each one a small act of betrayal that led to the final, enormous betrayal of a baby on the way. As she scrolled through more records, she noticed a series of hotel bookings. Each one matched times she had been out of the country. The pattern was undeniable. She printed out every statement, determined to compile an organized folder of evidence. When her phone rang, she nearly jumped. The caller was her lawyer friend, Safia, who specialized in family law. Amara had messaged her earlier, asking for urgent advice. "Amara, talk to me," Safia said the moment Amara picked up. Amara launched into the full story, from her shock at the baby shower to the extensive records she'd just uncovered. Safia listened quietly, punctuating Amara's recount with the occasional or unbelievable. Finally, when Amara finished, Safia said, "This is not going to be a small matter. If you move forward with a divorce, these documents will be crucial. Especially if Tark tries to dispute financial matters or spousal support. Keep everything, especially proof of funds misappropriated from your joint account." Amara's chest felt both tight and somewhat relieved. She had a plan, or at least the beginnings of one. "Thank you, Safia. I appreciate it. One more thing," Safia added. "Don't confront them alone about this evidence. They might try to spin a different story or destroy documents. Keep your cards close. I'll help you navigate this. You deserve better." Tears pricked Amara's eyes at the warmth in her friend's voice. "Thank you. I'll be in touch." As she hung up, she stared at the stack of papers in front of her. The receipt said it all. "We didn't mean for it to happen" was a lie. They meant it enough to plan it thoroughly, to spend shared money, to keep it hidden for months. The heartbreak she felt hardened into resolve. She wasn't going to let them walk over her any longer. That afternoon, Amara left the house to get some fresh air, her mind spinning with the weight of her discoveries. She strolled through a nearby park, where the tall oak trees offered dappled shade on the walking path. Couples jogged by, parents chased toddlers, and the normalcy of it all contrasted painfully with the turmoil in her life. As she walked, her phone buzzed again, a text from Tariq. "Can we talk? I'm at the cafe on Oak Street." Her first instinct was to ignore him. But she realized she needed answers, or at least closure, and perhaps the chance to confirm her suspicions about how long he'd been plotting this. She responded with a terse, "Fine. 10 minutes." When she arrived, she found him at a corner table, staring into a cup of coffee. He looked disheveled, as though he hadn't slept. She sat down opposite him, folding her arms. "What do you want?" she asked, no attempt to hide her anger. "I need you to understand," he said softly. "I never wanted to hurt you. It just—" "Stop," she snapped, cutting him off. "I've heard it already. You felt lonely, or I abandoned you. Save it." He pressed his lips together, swallowing whatever protest he had. Then he murmured, "Fine. I was wrong. I should have told you how I felt instead of looking for comfort elsewhere. But you were so busy chasing promotions and traveling the world, I thought you wouldn't care." She clenched her fists under the table. "So your solution was to have an affair with my best friend?" He cast his gaze down. It wasn't planned at first. But then I realized it was easier when you were gone. We didn't have to hide as much. And when you got that big offer to handle the overseas project, I encouraged you because... Yes, it gave me more time with Janelle. I know that's awful to say, but that's the truth. Amara inhaled sharply, the puzzle pieces clicking into place. You tricked me into leaving, she said slowly, her voice thick with a combination of hurt and fury. You wanted me out of the country so you could be with her. He exhaled, a long, defeated sigh. I know how it sounds. It sounds like betrayal. And it is betrayal. She glared at him, tears threatening again. I left because I thought it would help us financially, help your startup, help us reach our dreams. All that sacrifice. And the entire time, you were planning ways to see her behind my back. Tariq leaned forward, trying to grasp her hand, but she pulled away. Yes, I was selfish, he admitted. But I was also feeling suffocated, overshadowed by your success. You're always the star, Amara. You do everything right, and I just felt like your sidekick. Janelle understood me. She almost laughed at the absurdity. So you found a cure for your insecurity by sleeping with my best friend? Unbelievable. She stood, her legs trembling with rage. This conversation is over. He reached for her again. Wait. We can work something out. I do still care about you. Amara fixed him with a scathing look. You're about to have a baby with another woman. I'm not sure what reality you're living in, but it's not one where I stay married to you. She turned on her heel and walked out, ignoring his pleas. Outside, the sunlight hit her face, but she felt cold. As she hurried toward her car, her emotions threatened to overwhelm her. She realized that for all her heartbreak, there was a small, growing seed of resolve within her. She wasn't going to be a victim any longer. Amara spent the following days moving through life in a haze of heartbreak, but that heartbreak soon kindled into a quiet fury. She spoke very little to anyone besides her lawyer, Safia, and her parents. Even Mama Neka noticed how withdrawn she was, urging her to express her feelings. But Amara found a strange kind of clarity in her silence. It allowed her to plan methodically. Her mother-in-law, Mrs. Cade, tried calling multiple times. The first couple of voicemails were scolding, full of subtle accusations that Amara's career ambition had driven her husband to stray. But then the tone shifted into something almost pleading. She insisted that Amara be reasonable and consider the baby's well-being. Each voicemail only served to stoke Amara's anger. Janelle texted a few times, apologizing and begging for a chance to make it right. Amara refused to reply. She had no interest in being the bigger person for the woman who had shattered her trust. Meanwhile, neighbors and mutual friends seemed to murmur among themselves, unsure how to approach the scandal. Every day, Amara compiled more information. Bank statements, credit card bills, personal diaries. She documented everything, scanning them into digital copies, saving them in multiple secure locations. She discussed her next steps with Safia, who outlined how to file for divorce, how to protect her assets, and how to handle any attempts by Tark to claim spousal support. The more thoroughly Amara prepared, the calmer she felt. It was a quiet, calculated calm that no one saw coming. She carried on at work, maintaining a professional demeanor. To colleagues, she was as sharp and driven as ever, if a bit more distant. Few people knew about her personal crisis. It wasn't something she wanted to broadcast, at least not yet. The promotion to regional director was almost finalized, and she couldn't let Tariq's betrayal sabotage her future. One afternoon, she stood in her new corner office, looking out at the city skyline, phone in hand. Safia had just called to confirm she had the final documents ready for filing the divorce petition. Amara's heart thudded in her chest. Once she signed, there was no going back. Staring at the horizon, she whispered to herself, "This is the right move. Don't let them see you crumble." She realized then how her silence had been misread by both Tariq and Janelle. They probably believed she was too shell-shocked to act decisively. In truth, she was orchestrating her escape, quietly, meticulously. And when the time was right, the world would know who had really been wronged. She placed the phone down, a faint smile touching her lips. The next phase of her life was about to begin, and she would face it head-on. If Tariq and Janelle thought she was weak, they were in for a rude awakening. The divorce papers were in motion, but the drama was far from over. One evening, Safiya called with an update that nearly made Amara drop her mug of chamomile tea. "Amara, I have news," Safiya began. Tariq's side reached out with a possible dispute regarding paternity. Amara's brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" Safiya sighed. "They're suggesting the baby might not be Tariq's after all, and they're looking to do a DNA test. If the baby isn't Tariq's, they could claim you have no grounds to push for certain financial rulings based on infidelity." Amara's jaw clenched. So now they're implying Janelle was also with someone else? This is unbelievable. "It is," Safiya said gently. "But that's the legal strategy they seem to be floating. I wanted you to know before any public revelations hit. They might be trying to save face, or money." Amara stared at the stack of documents on her kitchen table. The idea that Janelle could have been unfaithful to Tariq, too, felt almost absurd. But betrayal had become the new normal in her life, and she could no longer dismiss anything as impossible. "Do we have any reason to believe it's not Tariq's child?" Amara asked quietly. Safiya paused. "It's all speculation at this point. No official tests have been performed. But let's just say the baby being someone else's would throw a twist into the divorce proceedings. You should prepare yourself for more drama." A heavy knot settled in Amara's stomach. The baby had been the central symbol of Tariq's infidelity. Now, if it turned out not to be his. She felt a strange mixture of relief and renewed anger. If Janelle had lied to Tariq as well, it meant both of them had been living in a web of deceit, further complicating the entire situation. Later that night, unable to sleep, Amara stared at the ceiling, replaying the possibility in her mind. She recalled a particular party months ago, where Janelle had been rather flirtatious with an old flame. Could it be that the baby was that man's child? Had Janelle orchestrated this entire fiasco, even leading Tariq to believe the baby was his? The thought gave her a shiver. If that were true, it meant Janelle's betrayal was even deeper than she'd realized. She tossed and turned, her thoughts in disarray. If the baby wasn't Tariq's, this would all blow up in their faces, but it also meant the heartbreak she endured was based on half-truths. Then again, did it matter whose baby it was at this point? The emotional damage had already been done. Regardless, Amara couldn't deny that she wanted the truth. If Janelle had lied, it would vindicate her in one sense, but also confirm just how manipulative the entire situation had become. Exhausted, she eventually drifted off to sleep, bracing herself for more revelations to come. The following day, Amara was at her desk finalizing a report when an email pinged from her financial advisor. She had asked for a deep dive into any hidden assets or accounts in Tariq's name. Though they shared a joint account, Tariq also had a separate business account for his startup. The question was whether he had more that she didn't know about. She scanned the email, her pulse quickening when she saw the phrase, "found an additional account under Tariq's name." Immediately, she opened the attachment. What she saw drained the color from her face. Not only did Tariq have a secret account, but it was flush with funds that dwarfed anything she expected to see from his supposedly fledgling startup. Intrigued, she read further. The account had been opened a year ago, around the same time she started traveling more intensively for work. Large deposits were made at regular intervals, far more than Tariq's official business income. The amounts were suspiciously high, and the descriptions were vague, often labeled simply as consulting fees or private funding. Her mind raced. Where had this money come from? Could he have been siphoning from their joint account or from unscrupulous investors? She remembered that he'd convinced her to invest a significant sum into his company's early stages. She'd done so in good faith. After all, they were married. Now, it looked like he'd been funneling money away for personal gain. She printed the statements, her heart thudding as she realized the gravity of this discovery. This account painted Tariq not just as a cheating spouse but as a potential thief, embezzling funds from the marital assets or from investors. The shock was nearly paralyzing, but amid the horror, she felt vindicated. This was more evidence to strengthen her legal position. She dialed Safia's number immediately. "We have a situation," Amara said, her voice trembling with pent-up rage. "Tariq has a secret account with thousands of dollars, possibly more, that he never disclosed. This changes everything." Safia let out a low whistle. "We'll use this, Amara. If he's hiding marital assets, that's serious. Keep digging for anything else, and I'll consult a forensic accountant." Amara hung up and leaned back in her chair. Her temple throbbed with tension. She'd already felt betrayed by the emotional and physical affair. Now she had proof of financial betrayal as well. She wondered if Janelle knew about this. Maybe she was in on it. Maybe that was part of their plan from the start: get Amara out of the way, have a baby to secure more money, and quietly siphon funds. The thought turned her stomach. She reminded herself that she was strong. She'd always been the driven one, the woman who got things done. No matter what else she discovered, she would come out on top, even if it meant walking away from everything but her dignity. Amara didn't confront Tariq about the secret account right away. She heeded Safia's advice and kept her new information close to the chest. She could almost hear her husband's voice from years back, praising her strategic thinking in business. "You're always 5 steps ahead, Amara." Well, now she'd apply that skill to him. A cold, calculating part of her began to craft a plan. She visited the bank in person to freeze joint assets, ensuring Tariq couldn't drain their accounts before the divorce settlement. She also transferred her personal savings into a new account under only her name. Any illusions of marital trust were gone. She made an appointment to finalize the sale of Tariq's car, a luxury SUV that, in truth, she had mostly funded. The payoff from that sale would go into her new personal account as well. Even if she ended up splitting assets in court, it was better to secure her resources now than let him burn through them. The strangest part was that after everything, she felt no guilt. She was simply protecting what was rightfully hers. One evening, she stood in their bedroom, opening drawers and throwing his clothes into suitcases. She didn't even flinch anymore when she saw a shirt that used to smell like his cologne. That nostalgic tenderness had been replaced by an icy resolve. As she zipped up the last suitcase, she muttered under her breath, "You played the long game, Tariq, so will I." She thought about Janelle, about how they might have laughed at her ignorance. She pictured Mrs. Cade scolding her for daring to have a career. Well, let them scold. Let them gossip. Amara would not be the silent victim. She would be the phoenix that rose from the ashes of this mess. When Tariq found out about the frozen accounts, he sent a barrage of angry texts. "Amara, what are you doing? You can't just freeze our money. This isn't fair. I still have bills to pay, responsibilities. You're overreacting." She responded with one line, "Talk to my lawyer." A wave of satisfaction coursed through her each time she read his frantic, confused replies. For once, he was the one scrambling, and she was the one in control. That night, she slept a little easier, knowing she had taken another step to secure her future. If Tariq believed he could manipulate her forever, he was sorely mistaken. Not long after freezing the accounts, Amara received a late-night call from an unknown number. Ordinarily, she would have let it go to voicemail, but a gut feeling told her to pick up. She pressed answer and held her breath. A young woman's voice spoke hesitantly on the line. "Amara? My name is Saad. You don't know me, but I know Janelle quite well." Amara felt a chill. How did you get my number? Janelle used to talk about you all the time. I went through some old phone records and asked around. Listen, I have information about her. She's not who she claims to be. Go on, Amara said, her heart rate spiking. Saad explained that she and Janelle had been close friends a few years ago before a massive falling out. According to Saad, Janelle had a history of targeting men in relationships, weaving elaborate lies, and using pregnancies, real or fake, to secure money. She had pulled a similar stunt in another city, though that time, she wasn't actually pregnant. This time, it seemed she genuinely was pregnant, but had possibly misled Tariq about being the father. Amara's jaw dropped. You're saying she does this for, what, financial gain? Emotional manipulation? Both, Saad replied. She thrives on the attention and the drama. I don't know if the baby is actually Tariq's, but I do know she's been in contact with another ex-boyfriend around the same timeline. Her pattern is to stoke jealousy, to push men into providing for her. Amara pressed a palm to her forehead, absorbing this. A wave of nausea hit her. Everything was far more twisted than she imagined. Why are you telling me this now? Amara asked. There was a pause. I saw a social media post about the baby shower. It made me realize Janelle was up to her old tricks. I felt guilty. I didn't stop her last time. I'm sorry for what you're going through, but you deserve the truth. Amara swallowed hard, tears stinging her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. I appreciate this. Before Saad hung up, she added, be careful, Amara. Janelle can be vindictive when confronted. Don't let her catch you off guard. Amara remained still, phone clutched to her ear even after the call ended. The final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Janelle had orchestrated a game that involved seducing Tariq, possibly even lying about the baby's paternity. She recalled the lavish baby shower she'd walked in on, the way Janelle had acted so guilty yet also so sure of her place at Tariq's side. Now it made sense. Shaken but determined, Amara decided she had to verify the paternity claims. If this baby wasn't Tariq's, the entire facade would crumble. Even if it was his, at least she would know the truth. With the new information from Saad, she felt like she finally had the upper hand. Early the next morning, Amara sat in her car outside Janelle's small apartment complex. She'd come unannounced, ignoring her own lawyer's advice to keep distance. She needed to confront Janelle face to face. Otherwise, she might never find closure. When Janelle opened the door, her eyes widened in shock. Her belly was more pronounced, a visible reminder that she was mere months away from giving birth. Amara noticed the faint circles under her old friend's eyes. Amara, she gasped, stepping back. What are you doing here? I need answers, Amara said simply. She brushed past her into the small living area. Janelle's place was sparsely furnished, the only touches of color coming from a few baby clothes folded on a chair. Please, sit, Janelle offered, trembling slightly. Amara shook her head. No, I won't stay long. Her gaze went to Janelle's stomach. Saad called me. Janelle paled. Saad, she repeated, voice faltering. Yes. Told me about your history of lying, manipulation, using pregnancies. She thinks you might have done it again, that you might not even be sure if Tariq is the father. Tears welled in Janelle's eyes. She looked away. It's not like that, she whispered. I'm not faking this pregnancy. I never said you were faking it, Amara snapped. But is Tariq the father, or isn't he? A tense silence fell. Finally, Janelle sank onto her couch, covering her face with her hands. She sobbed softly. I don't know, she confessed, her voice muffled. It could be Tariq's, or it could be someone else's, someone I was seeing before him. I loved Tariq, though. I genuinely did. It's not just about the baby. Amara's heart twisted in disbelief. Loved him? You told me once that you'd never look at him that way. That you were happy for us, proud even. Then you went and destroyed our marriage? Janelle lifted her tear-streaked face. I loved him too, she said, her voice raw. Watching you and him together, seeing how perfect you both were, something in me snapped. I wanted that kind of security, that connection. And when you left for those business trips, I found an opening. It was never supposed to go this far, but I fell for him, Amara. Amara felt a surge of anger. You realize you're describing a textbook betrayal of the worst kind? You were my best friend. I know, Janelle whispered. And I hate myself for it. But Tariq made me feel like I wasn't alone, like I mattered. He told me I was special, that you didn't appreciate him enough. And I let myself believe it. Amara's fingers curled into fists at her sides. Did you also lie to him about being the father, so he'd leave me? Not intentionally, Janelle sobbed. When I found out I was pregnant, I assumed it was his. But there's a chance it's not. Things got out of hand. For a moment, a flicker of pity stirred in Amara's chest. She had once loved Janelle as a sister. Now, seeing her reduced to tears and confessions, she realized that no one would walk away from this unscathed. She exhaled, trying to quell her rage. I'm filing for divorce, Amara said quietly. And I've frozen Tariq out of our joint accounts. You should tell him the truth about the paternity. Janelle nodded, tears still streaming down her face. I will, she promised. I'm sorry, Amara. For everything. Amara turned to leave. Just before stepping out, she glanced back at Janelle, who looked small and broken on the couch. Part of her wanted to lash out further, but she found no satisfaction in kicking someone who was already down. She left in silence, the door clicking shut behind her, uncertain whether she felt more anger or relief at Janelle's confession. Word spreads fast in tight-knit communities, and the scandal involving Amara, Tariq, and Janelle was no exception. Amara returned home from work one evening to find a few reporters lingering on her street, cameras ready. She kept her head high, refusing to speak to them. As she stepped into her house, her phone buzzed with a notification. A friend had sent her a link to a local gossip blog. The headline read, Business Powerhouse Betrayed, Husband's Alleged Love Child Exposed. Below, it was a photo of Amara from an old business conference, alongside a grainy picture of Tariq and Janelle from the baby shower. Anonymous sources claimed that Amara's neglect had pushed Tariq into Janelle's arms. The public debate in the comments section was fierce. Some blamed Amara for being too career-obsessed, while others slammed Tariq and Janelle as homewreckers. Amara felt her stomach tighten. She had anticipated rumors, but seeing them laid out so brazenly, complete with vicious speculation, triggered fresh anger. Still, she tried to remain calm. She had always believed that the truth, if managed carefully, would eventually come to light. Then, a few days later, an even bigger storm hit. A more reputable news site picked up the story, focusing on the legal drama around the baby's paternity and the allegations of financial misconduct in Tark's startup. Suddenly, the story wasn't just local gossip. Colleagues began whispering about it in the office corridors. Distant relatives called, demanding to know the real story. One evening, after an especially exhausting day, Amara scrolled through social media and saw that the hashtag Team Amara was trending locally. Her supporters praised her strength, condemning Tariq's betrayal. On the flip side, hashtag Justice for Tariq was also gaining momentum among those who believed he was merely a man denied emotional support by a workaholic wife. A few trolls even insisted the entire story was a PR stunt. Amara flung her phone onto the bed, exasperated. She had never wanted to be the center of a tabloid drama. Her personal life had become fodder for strangers' entertainment and moral judgments. She glanced at her reflection in the mirror, eyes weary, shoulders tense. The public spectacle was wearing on her, but she resolved not to fold under the weight of people's opinions. She had come too far to let gossip decide her fate. To regain some control, she crafted a statement with Safia's help, which she posted online. I appreciate the concern from friends, colleagues, and even strangers who have followed my recent personal challenges. While I cannot comment on ongoing legal matters, I want to clarify that no career success or ambition justifies betrayal of trust. I ask for privacy and understanding as I navigate this difficult time. Within minutes, it garnered thousands of reactions, supportive messages, hateful comments, and everything in between. Amara read a few, then forced herself to put the phone down. She would not be defined by how the public interpreted her heartbreak. The media frenzy took an unexpected twist when Tariq made a live appearance on a popular local radio show. Amara was in her office when a coworker burst in, urging her to tune in. She opened a web browser and found the live stream. On air, Tariq was telling his version of events, his tone a blend of remorse and justification. He talked about feeling overshadowed, about how he never intended to hurt Amara. He painted himself as a man who was neglected by an overly ambitious wife, seduced into poor decisions. The radio host pressed for details on the rumored questionable finances in his startup, but Tariq dodged the question. Then came the kicker. I still believe in our marriage, Tariq declared solemnly. Amara, if you're listening, we can fix this. I love you. I made a mistake, but we can start over, especially with this baby. Amara nearly choked on her coffee. Her phone started buzzing with messages from friends who were also listening. She realized she couldn't let Tariq spin this narrative unchallenged. She had to respond, but how? She was still debating whether to call in when the radio host announced they had an incoming call from Amara. Her heart fluttered. She recognized Safia's number on her phone, but she also saw the radio station line. The station must have forwarded Safia's call to the show. Before she could process further, she heard Safia's voice on the radio. Hello, this is Amara's legal representative, Safia said firmly. Tariq, you claim to love her, yet you betrayed her trust. Don't use live media stunts to manipulate her. Tariq stammered. I'm just. Amara grabbed her phone and texted Safia, put me on. Within seconds, she was patched directly into the live broadcast. Her voice trembled slightly, but she took a steadying breath and spoke with unwavering resolve. Tariq, you said you still love me and want me back, she began, her tone crisp. But you don't love me. You love who you pretended to be. A hush seemed to fill the studio. Tariq tried to respond, but he stammered. The radio host let the silence drag, clearly aware of the drama unfolding. Amara repeated, enunciating each syllable, I loved who you pretended to be. Her words cut through the broadcast like a blade. In 6 words, she laid bare the heart of the matter. She had loved a man who never truly existed, a facade Tariq wore to mask his insecurities and deceit. Before Tariq could recover, Amara ended the call. She stood up from her office chair, pulse racing, but feeling strangely liberated. Around her, stunned coworkers stood glued to their computers. Some gasped, others nodded in approval. That radio exchange became an instant headline, Amara shuts down Tariq's live radio plea. Amara felt a rush of relief. She had taken back her narrative, publicly and decisively. There would be fallout, but at least she'd spoken her truth. The legal process was grueling, but the outcome was in Amara's favor. With clear proof of Tariq's affair, financial misdeeds, and a suspicious separate account, the divorce settlement awarded her the majority of their marital assets. Tariq tried to argue for spousal support, claiming emotional distress, but the judge saw right through him. He left the courtroom with a defeated expression. Janelle, meanwhile, had moved away quietly after giving birth. DNA tests confirmed Tariq was indeed the father, meaning they would have a lifelong connection via child support and co-parenting. Amara, however, was free of any obligations. She relinquished any claim to the child, as it wasn't hers to begin with, and she had no desire to remain tethered to either of them. On the final day of the proceedings, as she walked out of the courthouse, she felt a lightness she hadn't known in years. It was as though a massive weight had been lifted off her shoulders. Her parents hugged her tightly on the courthouse steps, relief mingling with pride. The new role at her firm officially began the following week, and she packed her bags for New York, where she would be overseeing a major branch. It felt surreal. She was leaving behind the house she once thought she'd fill with a happy family. She was also leaving behind the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the drama that had consumed her life for the past year. Her final act before leaving was to donate boxes of old memories, photos from her wedding, cards from anniversaries, trinkets that once symbolized love. Part of her was tempted to burn them, but she opted for a different route. She dropped them off at a local recycling center, letting the process of renewal take over. Destroying them in anger felt too close to bitterness, recycling them felt like transformation, turning pain into something usable. Driving to the airport with Mama Neka and Papa Chitty, she gazed out the window, the city streets rolling by in a blur. She recalled the day she first moved here with Tariq, both of them full of optimism. That memory no longer hurt, it simply felt like another life. At the airport, her parents held her hands, tears in their eyes. She smiled reassuringly. "I'm going to be okay," she told them. "I have my career, my freedom, and my self-respect. That's all I need right now." She boarded the plane with a single suitcase, leaving the rest of her possessions to be shipped or sold. She felt no regret walking away from the material residue of a broken marriage. She wanted to start fresh, unencumbered. As the plane lifted off, she gazed at the clouds, a soft smile on her lips. She had walked away with nothing but her peace, and that was everything she truly wanted. New York City had a way of swallowing you whole, but Amara thrived in the chaos. She embraced her new role, working diligently in a sleek high-rise that overlooked the pulsing energy of Times Square. Despite the city's non-stop hustle, she found pockets of tranquility, an early morning jog in Central Park, an occasional weekend getaway to a quiet beach. She rented a modest yet stylish apartment in Manhattan's Upper West Side, filling it with plants, modern furniture, and the warm glow of independence. The year since her divorce had been a whirlwind of career successes and personal growth. Though she dated casually once or twice, she relished the clarity of being single, unburdened by secrets or heartbreak. One rainy afternoon, she was curled up on her sofa, reading a book about women in leadership, when she heard a knock on the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, she approached, peering through the peephole. To her surprise, it was a courier holding a small package. She opened the door. "Are you Amara?" the courier asked, checking the label. "Yes, that's me." He handed her a small brown box, asked for her signature, and left. She set the box on her coffee table, curiosity piqued. There was no return address, just her name. Carefully, she sliced the tape and opened it. Inside was a note, resting on top of a delicate wooden sculpture of a phoenix. The note read, "I saw this and thought of you. From the ashes, a woman reborn. With admiration, S." Amara's heart fluttered. S. She recalled the name Saad, the mysterious caller who had warned her about Janelle. Could this be from her? She picked up the sculpture, tracing the carved feathers with her fingertip. A phoenix rising from the ashes. It was a symbol of renewal, of triumph after destruction. She read the note again, her mind filled with questions. Why send this now, a year after the dust had settled? She didn't know Saad beyond that single phone call. Yet the gift felt oddly intimate, like a gesture of solidarity. Maybe Saad was following her story from afar, witnessing how she'd rebuilt her life. Smiling softly, Amara placed the phoenix on her mantle. In that instant, she realized the darkness she'd endured was truly behind her. She was free, successful, and living life on her terms. If this unexpected knock on the door symbolized anything, it was that her story wasn't over. New chapters were still unfolding, and she would face them with the grace and strength she'd gained over the past year. In the weeks that followed, Amara often found herself glancing at the phoenix sculpture, a tangible reminder of how far she'd come. One Saturday morning, she sat by the window, sipping coffee while city traffic hummed below. She reflected on the chain of events that had brought her here. Betrayal. It was the word that once defined her anguish. It had shattered her illusions, leaving her to question everything she believed in. But in the end, it also propelled her to discover hidden wells of resilience within herself. If Tariq had not betrayed her, she might never have pursued her dream role in New York so soon. She might have stayed in a stagnant situation, blindly loyal to a future that didn't truly exist. Loss. She lost a husband and a best friend in one crushing blow. Yet she gained clarity and self-respect. She realized that the love she thought she had was no love at all, it was a performance, a camouflage for someone else's insecurities. Family. Her parents, her real friends, even acquaintances who reached out with kindness, they all rallied around her. She found a sense of belonging that transcended the sadness of her broken marriage. She felt more connected to the genuine people in her life than ever before. Freedom. By disentangling herself from toxic relationships, she found a new kind of freedom. A freedom to explore her ambition without guilt, to shape her personal life on her own terms, and to bloom into a version of herself that was unafraid to demand respect. Now, as she stood in the sunlit corner of her apartment, phone buzzing with new projects and possibilities, Amara felt nothing but gratitude. The heartbreak had been excruciating, but it was also transformative. What had started as a cruel betrayal ended up paving a path to her greatest blessings: independence, self-awareness, and unshakable confidence. She placed her coffee mug on the windowsill and turned to the phoenix sculpture on the mantel. Its carved wings were spread wide, as if ready to soar. She exhaled, allowing a peaceful smile to settle on her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, perhaps to the universe, perhaps to the woman she was becoming. Because what they meant for betrayal had, indeed, become her greatest blessing. The end.